Administrative yellow has no precise Pantone shade. It is just, in my mind, the color of some kind of odious bureaucratic requirement. Once you notice, you'll see it everywhere. Here, a very famous example from the Russian Empire, 1875, a yellow billet, a kind of internal passport or travel document. These were a prostitute's registration or working permits and came with the requirement for a checkup, but also certain freedoms. Jewish women, for example, who were famously restricted to the Pale of Settlement, could register as prostitutes and trade in their old papers for these and thus be able to go to Petersburg or Moscow. And even though I know it was for my own good, I always hated my personal yellow card, also known as the International Card for Vaccine Prophylaxis. Maybe you have one. Getting it, carrying it, keeping it. My Japanese encephalitis shots are probably the first I remember entering here in my early teens, and it's just a record of horrible things you don't want to happen to you. And in China, famously, we have the yellow registers, collected first in the Ming Dynasty starting around 1370 for about 275 years. They recorded the tax obligations in both labor service and payments for everyone in the empire, and it was probably the most voluminous archive of the Ming Dynasty, and maybe in human history to that point. They were collected, checked, reconciled every 10 years, and so they were adding to this collection 30 rooms of documents per decade. By the 16th century, there were already something like 667 buildings. Fire was an obvious risk, and so all this was purpose-built in the middle of a lake, and so it was known as the Back Lake Archive. Today, the name of the place is Xuanwu Lake in Nanjing. And all of this went up in fire in 1645 during the change of dynasties. The yellow registers were so named because these documents were produced in quadruplicate in proper Chinese bureaucratic fashion. One copy stayed in the county that it referred to, one at the prefecture, and one at the provincial treasurer's office. All of those were wrapped in blue paper, and hence they were called blue registers. The color was Qing, as we talked about many videos back. It was the final central government copy that went up to the Board of Revenue, the Hubu, that was wrapped in yellow, hence the name. You can think of this as a long and unending struggle between the central government, which wants every person and piece of land on the tax registers to extract wealth from, and the people who are always trying to evade and get themselves off of these lists. But we've been looking here at a slightly different and more specific part of this larger project, the so-called fish scale registers. Their purpose was to specify every bit of land in the empire, its location, extent, and so on, and even its productivity, so you would know how much to tax out of it, because, of course, sandy land or something up a hillside is not as good as prime farming territory. The scale of this is just mind-boggling. Here you can see the sketches of the land with clarifying text. This is from the particular county in Anhui in the late Ming period. They were called fish scale registers because when you kind of zoomed back and looked at some of these maps in aggregate, all of these plotted out land areas have the appearance of the scales on a fish, and we're looking here at one version from 1788, the Qianlong reign period. Then and now, China and everywhere, this is a regular function of government, but looking at it this way, I always find it just slightly predatory. The countless millions over many centuries who labored to get their lands and names out of this administrative yellow might agree.